All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a discussion of the Edan Trilogy. I am so excited to be here today with my three extremely special guests, and I will introduce them first, and then we will get rolling with this discussion. So I have right next to me Marcus. Wonderful, wonderful reviews that you wrote for all three books, and I really deeply appreciate that, Marcus. It's been really fun interacting with you, and I'm so glad that I have the chance to talk with you about the books now.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to meet you as well.
All
In
right.
person, finally.
Yeah, this is cool. This is one of the best parts of BookTube, honestly, is meeting the people that you've gotten to know through comments and stuff like that. So this is a lot of fun for me. And below Marcus, I have a very special guest. And you might be guessing from the name that there is a relation there. And indeed, this is my daughter, my older daughter, Rohana. Hello, Rohana, dear. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Thanks for reading my books.
You're welcome. I guess you're my dad, so had to give it a shot.
Okay, that was nice. I mean, that was very nice. I'm very glad you read them. And
I'm glad I read them too. They're amazing books, actually.
oh,
Aside from the bias, they are objectively incredible books, and I was very happy to read them.
oh, thank you. How cool. So awesome. Well, and I have here someone I'm very excited to talk to, someone who gives me some of the richest comments on YouTube, and I'm sure many other people have seen these comments and interacted with him on various channels because MacScarfield, you're all over BookTube. You don't have a channel per se yet, but you leave the best comments, and I love how you provide all these great insights into etymologies and history, and just so much fun to be able to see you in person.
Well, the honor is mine, Philip, Professor. I don't know how. It is such an honor to finally be speaking to you, more or less face to face on this channel, and hope I'll try and not screw up too much.
Oh, don't worry about it. There's no pressure. We're all friends here, so
yeah, but again, there is this, as you have talked a lot about these cultural contexts, and for me, from Norway, we have, I think, similar to a certain nemesis, we have a certain it's not that bad attitude. So you were talking to one Roycroft, and he was mentioning a comment that I thought his was a bit on the nose, and I gave this. I mean, he wrote one of my third favorite book of last year.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh. So I apologize if I'm not that bubbly American as you are.
I have plenty of
friends. Yes.
I have lots of friends from Scandinavia, so I'm quite used to it, and no worries. Yeah. So fantastic. I'm so grateful to the three of you for being here. This is going to be fun. So let's launch right into it. And we're going to have Rohana go first because she has to leave early. And I'm going to let her go first in the hope that we'll get to all of her observations and questions. And if not, that's fine too. But Rohana, we're going to start with some non-spoiler questions and or observations. So what would you like to say that is non-spoiler?
Okay, well, my general observation for the series as a whole is honestly pretty short and sweet, because I was just trying to think, like, what could I say that could just possibly represent everything that I feel about this series and what it represents. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and say basically what the Adan series makes me think of is the fact that life and people are complicated. Darkness and light, evil and good exist within one another. And the only truth in the universe is love.
Wow, that's a very high compliment. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, that's I think you boil it down pretty well, and I am certainly trying to convey that in this story. And really, I think that's what stories are all about. So yeah, thank you. I love that opening. Thank you, dear. So let's go on to Marcus. And what non-spoiler question or observation would you like to put out there?
Well, so for absolute full transparency, this was the first fantasy trilogy I've ever read. So,
That's
Oh,
an honor.
wow. That's
and I think it
so
was,
cool.
I took a break from reading for probably, 15 or so years since high school. Barely read a book outside of college. And then earlier this year, I decided to start reading again. And then I saw your books on, I think, Twitter.
Wow.
So I decided to give them a shot, and
Huh.
it's just an amazing journey overall. So I noticed throughout the books, a lot of trying to be non-spoilery, a lot of theological themes,
Yes.
which I'm sure we'll get into later. I noticed that the writing style, like throughout the books, during some more high energy scenes, you may have some POVs that switch back and forth quicker, which
Yep.
was really helpful. And then the overall themes of the books themselves just painted a beautiful story throughout the entire trilogy.
Thank you. I'm so honored that this trilogy spoke to. What was it, by the way, on Twitter that said to you, yeah, let's try these books? Was it the cover? What was it, the just do you recall why in the first place you thought, let's give this a try?
I think a lot of it was just the way that you interact with your readers on Twitter. So it's kind of cool to read a book from somebody that actually interacts with their followers.
Yeah. This is one of the cool things about the age we're in now is we have YouTube and Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and all these other social media that offer opportunities for authors and readers to interact, and it's so enriching on both sides, really. I love it. I love being able to talk to an author whose work I've enjoyed, and I just feel like it's added a lot to the reading experience. So it's a joy for me to be able to interact with people like you. And I feel so thankful that you've read the books. I mean, to me, the story doesn't really come alive until it's in the hands of readers. And that's when it comes alive, when there's those characters running around in your brain and you're doing whatever it is with your experiences to those characters. That story is out of my hands now, and it's in your mind. It's happening, and that to me is when the story is actually alive. So I really appreciate readers a lot. So thank you, and we'll move on to MacScarfield. MacScarfield, what would you like to say, non-spoiler?
Oh dear. Well, I think I sent you a full list of topics that we might talk about, but
yes, you did. I appreciate that.
Yes, but the most, but I think we could discuss some of your names, perhaps. And I know that I've written a whole list of where your names might be inspired from. So, people, don't worry, we are not going to talk about the whole list. but there are a couple that I think is, even from a non-spoiler point of view, is quite interesting. I mean, for example, you have talked a lot about the inspiration for the name Daywraven, so I think that's well discussed from now.
Okay.
But for example, Imhar, the name of Imhar, I mean, yes, because I know some Viking history, and I know that Imhar, at least in the spelling where it's without an H or with just one R, is the one that is used for describing the famous Viking lord
Ivar.
Ivar the Boneless.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting, I think you just chose it for it's a cool name, but I thought that was an interesting choice.
Accurate, yes. I like the sound of the name when I saw it, and I thought, yeah, let's use that name, essentially. The others, though, on your list, I think there are explanations behind most of them. So, yeah. But it's Irish. It's an Irish. Well, it's an Irish variant, or what the Irish called Ivar the Boneless. Correct. Yeah.
And your antagonist Bledla, at least for the first book.
Yes.
Without spoiling too much. I was immediately thinking about Attila the Hun's brother, Leda.
Yes, and in the sagas, he's called Budli. Yeah. So yes, that is correct. That's where I took that sound and I thought that sounds like a good name. And we'll note that John Gwynne also took that name from one of his characters, which is kind of cool. In not in The Faithful and the Fallen, but in the sequel trilogy that he wrote, A Blood and Bone, he used the same name, which I didn't know because I wrote these before I think even before he published actually those books. So I thought, well, he has good taste too. So
and Bagsack is perhaps the most unfortunately named of the characters. But even he has a Viking history because that's one of the commanders of the Great Heen Army, right?
Correct. Although it's the Old English version of his name. But yes,
of course.
Yes. Yep. Correct. But I just loved the sound of it. I thought, Bagsack, what a crazy name. I've got to have a character with that name. Yeah. So
it also really suits his character.
I think so.
Without giving too much away.
And for one final one, I would say, again, you do have to stop me because I can list all the names, but Urd, of course, is one of the three wise Norns of Norse mythology.
Correct.
Which is quite fitting for a crone with some magical powers, let's say, without going too deep into spoilers.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And in her case, that's I'm most definitely trying to borrow some of the aura, let's say, from that name, that the connotations that name conjures, at least for me, is, as you say, Ord is one of the Norns from Norse mythology, Ord Verdandi and Skuld. And she's supposed to be a very wise and crafty and magical person. So I'm most definitely pilfering from Norse mythology, as I do in many other places in the series. Yeah,
but you do it very well.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I would, and also I want to apologize to one Roycroft. I also think he does it quite well.
I think he
again, and I'm very excited for his second book, Bold Ascension, which I'm expecting every minute now.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I started it, and it's really a great start. I think you're gonna love it. So yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Three, for those openings. And now we're going to move on to, just in case you're someone out there who's watching and you have not yet read The Way of Adan, we're going to be doing spoilers for book 1 in a second here. So that is your warning for The Way of Adan spoilers. So Rohana, what would you like to ask about The Way of Adan?
Well, okay, my thing is more of an observation than
observations are good too.
But anyway, for The Way, so The Way, when I first started reading it, I was like, okay, Dad, you're doing the country boy, leaves home, has magical powers, is the chosen one type of thing. And granted, you're doing it very well, but it is a lot deeper than that. And in retrospective, like taking the whole series into consideration, I do think, and I know you did this on purpose, but the narrative of this series is the story of a man who is basically achieving enlightenment. And this is all the sort of impetus for all of this begins in The Way, when Dayraven meets the elf. And it's interesting too, because like, of course you don't know this at first, but that first like step to achieving enlightenment, it really seems like more of a curse than a blessing, honestly, because Dayraven's just like, I want to live this normal life, like I want to marry my country girlfriend, like I just want to live in my village, and now I have this like horrible, terrible power that makes me see how vast and uncaring the universe is, and like how much like humanity doesn't really matter, and also like how terrible humans can be to each other. And yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting way to get the whole story started. And I also appreciate how you have a much deeper story within this story that at first seems to fit a pretty common fantasy archetype. But instead of just simply a country boy who is the chosen one, he's actually a vessel for something that's a lot bigger. Yeah, and so my observations just mostly have to do with the fact that I think this makes sense given like our family background and everything, but like the Eastern influences of your book, especially like the Eastern theological influences. So yeah, that's my observation for the way it began.
Wow, well, lucky for you, you got your looks and your brains from your mother. So,
you don't really believe that, do you? Come on.
Well, I do actually, but what I hope is that for many people, upon finishing the series, especially the third book, that they will see the first book in a different light.
Yes, exactly. And I definitely did. Yeah.
Even specific moments will be like, oh, I thought, okay, then this is different than I thought. And if that happens, and I've heard from a few people who said, yeah, the first book seems different now. I actually want to reread it, because I think I'll read it differently.
For sure.
That's what I was trying to achieve. And yeah, so I'm delighted to hear you say that. That there were things going on that were maybe not as obvious without the context of book 2 and 3, but maybe they become clearer after having gone through the entire journey. So yeah, and that's kind of cool when a series does that, and when a series proves to be worth reading again because it changes the second time you go through the earlier stages.
And me, like, I don't like reading or watching stuff again. Often I don't even like reading, or I don't like finishing what I read or watch in the
so just so you guys know, this is my daughter who read 13 books in the Wheel of Time and then said, I don't think I'll read the last book.
I've done this with a lot of things, like a lot of stuff. I just lose interest. I lose steam. That didn't happen with your books. I read all of his books within like a week. It like 10 days, honestly. I was hooked. Like I couldn't.
Well, the funny part was that book 3 wasn't even out, and you were on a flight somewhere. And
I was reading it on the plane. Yeah.
You were like, you actually texted me. You said, "I'm bored. I'm on a plane. Can I read your third book?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not done."
I read it on my phone. That's how addicted I was.
So so you got a sneak peek ahead of everybody else on that one.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But yeah, that's all to say is I definitely want to read the first book again, knowing that. And also, I think it's beautiful too because the first book kind of lays out what brings Dayraven back to humanity in the first place, like at the end of the day, yes, the universe doesn't care about us. Like, yes, humanity is horrible and terrible, but this existence is worth it because there's love, and like the reason why Dayraven had that seed of goodness inside of him the whole time is because of love, because of the love that he was raised with.
Yes, so I think you just basically expressed the heart of Dayraven's heroism, which is his insistence that human existence does have meaning, that we can make meaning, even if the universe is indifferent or hostile or what have you, that we can make meaning, and that we're worth it, that in spite of the fact that yes, we have been a very destructive species, that we have done all kinds of harm to each other and to other creatures in this world, there is enough potential in us for wonder and joy and beauty and love that we are, it's a close call, but that we're worth it in some way, and that potential makes our existence worthwhile.
Yeah.
So yeah. Thank you, dear.
Mhm.
So, Marcus, what would you like to say about the first book, The Way of Adan?
So it starts with the first book, and then the theme of it goes throughout the entire series, or trilogy rather. But what I find very fascinating is, so at the beginning, whenever Dayraven, acquires the elf shard, putting it nicely,
Yep.
he's ultimately exiled from his own community.
Right.
And then it sets forth this path of, or this journey rather, of theological development throughout the story, I would say.
Sure.
So, which is a very common theme in, I would say, many different religions over time, where you have that exile story that transitions into that journey of enlightenment or development in some way, depending on your faith. I found that very fascinating as well. Is there any influences that you can point to for that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I grew up in the Christian tradition, and I think that's fairly evident, and maybe most so in the third book in some ways, with what Dayraven ends up doing, which I won't say because we're still on the first one, but yeah, I would say it's a mixture for me, Marcus, of so I grew up, my father's a pastor and my grandfather as well. And I have a great grandfather who was a pastor. So I most definitely grew up in that tradition. And even for a time in my teens, I thought I was going to be a pastor too. And so I read a lot of theology myself. And then later, about halfway through college, realized as I studied more and more theology and philosophy, and realized I don't think that is what I'm going to be, and that I started to, and it's funny because I never had a moment where I just said no, I don't believe this anymore or anything like that. It was just more like a very gradual journey for me of opening up, and I don't want to use the word doubt. It's just my perspective changed is what happened. I think my perspective changed. So I still consider myself a spiritual person and very much a seeker. And part of that seeking involved learning more about various religious traditions and going out into the world. And I lived in Nepal for a time and learned a lot about both Hinduism and Buddhism there. I'm not an expert on those things, but I am a very curious, let's say, fan, if you will. But yeah, those philosophies are, I think, this trilogy in some ways is me trying to figure out how I feel about these essentially two traditions that are the most familiar to me. The tradition I grew up in, which is Christianity, and the tradition that I have found myself very attracted to, which is the more Eastern philosophy, the Buddhism and the Hinduism, and ideas about, well, okay, all religious traditions wrestle with the idea of mortality. All right, what happens to us when we die? And there are various answers. I don't think there are necessarily, certainly for the mystics in each religion, I think the answers are actually very similar. For the mystical side of each religion, I think you can find a lot of very cool similarities, and I tend to be attracted toward that side myself. But there are some differences, of course, and that's something I'm exploring here, along with the. Where I am something of an expert is in medieval literature, and particularly in Old English and Old Norse. And the pagan Germanic answer to this question of mortality is, well, we're all going to die. So what do? Well, do great deeds, so your name lives on, and the bards will tell stories of you to succeeding generations. So there's yet another answer, that I'm throwing that in the mix. So I have a kind of there's the Christian answer, which is live a good life, be faithful, and the reward will be in the next life. And then there's the Eastern answer, which is more like, well, realize that you are ephemeral, you are fleeting, but that you are connected to everyone and everything. You're part of the universe, right? And then there's this other answer of, do bold deeds and live with courage and that sort of thing. So I think this trilogy is me just trying to work out, okay, how do I feel about these answers, and wrestling with the whole idea of it. So yeah. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, and then some. It's pretty clear that you were doing that as well, just because I think there's three or four different religious type
Four
factions. I would say four.
Yeah.
So it's kind of clear that you kind of wrestle with that throughout as well.
Yeah, and I didn't mention the other religion there is the Dwergs, who don't worship gods at all. They practice ancestor worship. So yeah. And they're very connected to the earth as well. Yeah. So yes, thank you. Wonderful question, or observation. MacScarfield, what would you like to ask me about the Way of Adan?
A bunch of stuff, but I think I would start with perhaps with the influence from the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander, because I think that is. You have talked in several of your chats about your love for Tolkien. You have talked about how especially Astrolad is tied to the Earthsea cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Correct.
And of course, your love for The Fool and Assassin. Which series is that again?
Oh, are you talking about Realm of the Elderlings?
Realm of the Elderlings, of course, So, and the Chronicles of Prydain is perhaps a bit forgotten, at least for us of the younger generation. And of course, some of us were traumatized by the Disney adaptation, The Black Cauldron. I mean, that's a dark movie for a kid.
It is actually.
I have friends who are still traumatized by it. And
your kids read this traumatic story. Yeah.
And I even read this the first book, the Book of Tree.
Yes.
And I was and one of the things that I noticed of your books, you have mentioned, I mean, Tolkien, his Fellowship of the Ring, they are this kind of middle-aged hobbits, from more or less, who are seeking this adventure. You have, and in Earthsea, you have more, of course, you have Sparrowhawk and you have Tenar, you have, but still they're very individual. So I wonder that I thought must have been a very inspiration for David, and must have been Taran, actually, because of he is this who dreams about becoming this great warrior and become and kind of has to get some realizations, to say at least.
Taran the pig keeper, or swine herder, if you will. Yes. No, I read the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander before I read Tolkien. In fact, it was my first fantasy series that I can remember reading. So I was probably around 11 or so, I would guess. And they had a big impact on me. And I thought, yes, more, please. And then Tolkien just blew open the doors as far as my love for fantasy. But yes, I have not, it's funny, I have not reread the Chronicles of Prydain. So whatever influence is there, it's just from my boyhood. And I'm sure you're correct, because we're talking about an archetype here. Like Rohana mentioned from the beginning, oh yes, I know what this is. This farm boy, suddenly is in over his head, has to leave this familiar womb-like existence that he really doesn't want to leave, and that sort of thing. And Taran very much, I think, matches that archetype in many ways. I think that these things exist for a reason, and that they meet some deep psychological need that we have, and that as we wrestle with our own development, our own maturation, and how we relate to the world. So, I think that we're tapping into something. And like any tool, it can be used well, or it can be used not very well. So hopefully it makes sense. I do try, actually, to be a little subversive. And there are hints of that, I think, even as early as The Way of Adan. So I have a prologue where 3 priests die and they martyr themselves. And then I start chapter 1, and you meet this nice young boy who seems like he should be, or honestly, he seems like he ought to be the protagonist of the series, right? But no, he meets an untimely demise. And I'm trying to signal something there from the beginning, that it has to do with violence, because there's a lot of violence in this trilogy, and the whole context is a war, is a holy war. And I'm trying to say from the beginning that a thing like this is going to have repercussions. It's going to have ripples that affect people in many, many places. When you have a conflict like this, where people are going to be killed, people are going, there are going to be, and we have a terrible phrase for it these days called collateral damage, right? These are human lives. So I wanted to first get my reader to feel like I like this fellow, I feel a little attached to him, and then to have that character lose his life like that. I'm trying to say there are consequences to even this war that is beginning far away from where this boy lives, but there are consequences. And those Pukas never would have attacked had the priests of the way and their followers not been rounding them up in order to use them as weapons. They were weaponizing these creatures. And so the creatures were naturally trying to fight back. And they didn't understand that Oswy had nothing to do with it. So yeah, I'm just trying to portray that everything is connected. Everything is connected. But yeah, you were talking about Lloyd Alexander. Yeah, I mean it's in there along with all the other stuff that's rolling around in this brain, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, because again, your southwestern nations are very clearly Celtic.
Correct.
Influenced.
That's right. They're very Celtic. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I note when I read the version in the books of the Horned King, I mean, that's a character that you really do not want to meet.
Yeah.
I mean, he has blood-stained hands, he's all up onto his arms, and so that's a interesting character for a children's story.
Yeah. Well, I think Lloyd Alexander was from a time when, much older, of course, stuff like Grimm's fairy tales and that sort of thing, where it was standard fare to traumatize kids with scary stories. we seem to be more gentle today with our stories for kids, I guess. I don't know. Did they toughen them up with those horrifying stories? I don't know. So anyway, yeah. But thank you. Yes, definitely a big influence, I would say. So are we ready to move on to the Prophet of Edan? All right.
Yeah.
Rohana, what would you like to ask or observe about book 2? And this is everybody's signal for spoilers for book 2.
Okay, so for book 2, I think this honestly goes with what we've been talking about already, but first I have to say book 2 is my favorite.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes. And I think this is where like your whole kind of like making characters very like nuanced and black and white that really starts to come into play. You really get into the minds of everyone. Some of the evil ones, their actions become more understandable. Like what's his name? Begins with a J.
Yoruman.
Yes, Yoruman. Yeah. Yoruman is obviously like a bad, twisted guy. But once you like get into his head, you're kind of like, okay, like you have some trauma. Like I see where you're coming from,
Right.
But then you also have like good characters who are like, you see the darker sides of them, like Orvandil, I think is a great example.
Yeah.
And of course, he's also one of my favorite characters. He's awesome. And I think
Orvandil. Okay.
Yes. Cool. And I think like your characters are so compelling because they're so complicated. They're much more than, I mean, they can obviously fit into archetypes because like what can't, in literature, media, etc. But they're complicated, and there's more than meets the eye. And I also love how in the second book, I think you really start to see like the theme of morality, like what is morality? And you show just like how everyone's morality and moral compass is according to their own version of reality. You can make humans believe just about anything. You can make them believe that they're right, that what they're doing is completely just. Like Bledla's horrible, but he 100% believes what he's doing, that he's in the right, that what he's doing is for the good of everyone. Like in a way, he's like kind of selfless, like
Yes.
he's so convinced that this is what the world needs. So yeah, that's what I really liked about the second book, how everything starts to get pretty murky and complicated. And your books, they have a real like darkness, like there's a very real, tangible darkness to them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, with characters like Orvandil, and maybe if I had been trying to write a different trilogy, he could have been the hero in a way.
right, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
But this was not what I was trying to do in here. But I liked his role, and I liked him trying to figure himself out, and him not wanting to be just a killer.
right.
He meeting Dayraven, I think, was a catalyst for him, because in
Yes.
Dayraven he saw what he could be.
Right.
He didn't believe before that he could aspire to be anything more than what he was, but somehow he saw in Dayraven this idea that I can be better. And some people like that. They inspire others to be their best.
And this is the second book is also when Sequara like goes on her badass rampage, right? Or is it the third?
That's the third book.
That's the third. Okay, right. But still, that's like the same. That's the same deal,
Yes.
Like
they're going in opposite directions.
She massacred those soldiers, but you're like, girl, like you go, like good for you. Sometimes violence is justified. So
yeah. No, and Orvandil is, he's not a murderer according to the rules, right?
Right.
Never kill anyone outside of combat. But, for example, you learn in this book that he killed his foster brother because when he was young, they fight over a woman, and that haunts him. And he feels like a murderer, even though they obeyed the rules. There was a ritualistic aspect to that combat where they agreed to holmgang, and MacScarfield will be very familiar with that term. Orvandil's name, by the way, too, MacScarfield will know and appreciate, perhaps. This is a character straight out of Norse mythology. There's a story about Thor rescuing a fellow whose name was Orvandil, and he's telling this fellow's wife, a witch named Groa, about it, as Groa is getting a piece of a whetstone out of his head, which had been lodged there during combat with a giant, which is a long story. But she's helping him get this stone out. And as he's telling the story about her husband, he says, yeah, I rescued him from the giants, and I put him in a basket to bring him back. And while he was there, his toe got frozen. So I snapped it off and I threw it up into the sky, and that's the North Star. That's the planet Venus, essentially. And that's Orvandil, is the dawn star. And there's more to this mythological person, but that's the gist of it. And I actually even have a little moment when Orvandil and Dayraven are at the funeral of Dayraven's father, which is one of my favorite moments from Prophet of Adan. Is the scene in the midst of combat in the Battle of Thuhan between Orvandil and Edgil, Dayraven's father. One of these tragic moments where hopefully the reader feels like, I don't want either one of these to die, and and that's hopefully was a poignant moment. But afterwards, at the funeral of Edgil, Dayraven tells Orvandil essentially, I need you. You're my friend, and you're like the star that foretells the rising of the sun in the morning. Or I can't remember exactly what I wrote there, but there's a line that's basically me giving a little nod about Orvindil's the origin of his name, at least. So, but yeah, I hope that comes across, the complexity of the characters, that they are conflicted. You need conflict in your characters, and a lot of them, I think that hopefully that comes through for the readers, where you have characters in situations where there's no maybe even good alternative. There's just, you know, the least awful alternative, like in that situation.
What,
Combat between Orvindil and Edgil. Yeah.
right, because that's what life actually is like. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So, Marcus, how about you? What would you like to talk about in terms of the Prophet of Edan?
So I think my favorite part of it was the different types of conflict that you see. So just to list a couple. So you have Irkenwald, King Irkenwald. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That's good. That's good.
So him and Bledla kind of have this weird conflict between them, which is like a religious type political type conflict.
Very much so. Which has preeminence, the state or the church? You know,
right?
Debate. Yeah.
Super interesting. And then you have Dayraven's conflict with himself in the Elf Shard.
Yep.
So that's helping to develop that character along. And then you have also the awesome battle scene at the end. And then another part of the Prophet of Edan that I really liked was bringing in those tribal factions.
Yes, Munzil and the Ilarchai, or the folk of the tribes, as they prefer to call themselves. Yeah,
absolutely. So that proves a lot to be very valuable for book 3. I think there's a lot of story for that. Yeah. But the way that you wrote those tribal characters was really interesting as well.
Thank you. MacScarfield, did you want to make a point there?
Yeah, I mean, again, Munzil is perhaps my favorite character, of the new characters, because again, he's a very complex guy. On one hand, you understand he wants revenge, but you know, at what cost? And even your leader of the Wildlands, Surt.
Yes,
of course, which of course I, as a Norse Norwegian knower of Norse mythology, knows that's Sutr. The fire Jotun, or the fire giant that will end Oscar, at Ragnarok. So a bit of doom and gloom there. But the character of Surt is more than just your bog standard Attila Han reimagined. Because one of the things that there is. This could have been tied by also to the last book. You have this Beowulf meets the Vietnam War aspect, and Surt is very much one character that could be read as a kind of a dark take on Beowulf. You know, he is called the ring giver. He is generous with his own crew. He is, and he is someone who is at the front of battle, who everyone gathers to. So. And
ideal hero,
massive feats of combat, you know. So
yeah, he is an ideal hero according to that culture's understanding of heroism. And to go back to the idea of conflict, Sequara too, and Rohana mentioned this, I think, as well. There's her conflict of, she is essentially a healer. She sees herself as a healer, and yet, because of her role as future monarch, and as it turns out, she is now the monarch because of what happens in that battle in the middle of Prophet of Edan, where Urd and Queen Faldira lose their lives. She is in this role where she cannot be a healer. She has to be a combatant. She has to kill if she's going to bring about the freedom of her people and her island. And it's a horrible thing for her, because that's not something she ever wanted to be. So her journey also fascinates me, and it's not a role that she willingly goes into, let's put it that way. Hopefully that is clear enough. But yeah, Now I don't know if did I answer your question, MacScarfield, or what was there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was Marcus' question, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that was Marcus's. Anything else
yeah.
on that, Marcus, that you wanted to finish with?
I think so. The only other thing I wanted to ask was whenever Queen Feldira,
Yes.
Feldira and Erd were ultimately killed in that middle battle, it was almost like, and I don't know if this is like a magic element, but whenever they were both killed, there was like some sort of protection that was applied to the remainder of the group, or at least Raven.
Yeah. So what happened there was Ord essentially put forth her spirit, and this is something you can do if you have the gift and you're accessing it. You're going to the Song of Origins. If you go too far, you don't come back. Your spirit essentially gets dispersed outside of your body, and you're done, right? And in her case, she did it quite intentionally with the idea of disrupting, because pieces of her spirit entered into Bledla and Arna and Yorman and so forth, and Heremode, and disrupted that, because for a moment they had this weird experience of being both her and themselves, and so their ability to control their gift is temporarily taken away. And thereby Ord allows Sequara and Dayraven and the others to flee, and to the point where they do get pursued, but Dayraven does that thing with the wave and they go over that isthmus, which is
super cool.
Yeah, that's an enhanced version of something that does happen in the sagas, where the Vikings will basically take their ship out of the water and haul it over some land and then go out the other side and thereby escape their pursuers, so yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So, MacScarfield, did you have something else on book 2 before I let Rohana ask her?
Yeah, I could perhaps. I mean, one of the things that I love and which you give us so much is world building, and we are introduced to these nations of Sildharan, Sundara, Golgar, and the Wildlands. I think since Marcus talked about the Wildlanders, perhaps one of my favorite crew of this story is, of course, the Golgar Scouts.
Oh, the Scouts, yes.
Yeah, I
Captain
mean
Uthran.
the line about Tyrion's mother, I will brings a smile to my face.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
again, as you know, I know at least you and Rohana, again has this Nepali connection, and I must say that, of course, I have been to Nepal. So
That's
when
right.
I was
Yeah.
reading those books, unlike a certain other who was horrified by the day ravens climbing, I was feeling really reminiscing about traveling to the mountains on the treks in Nepal. So
Yeah.
and that's, I think, one of your great strengths, of course, when you write about the forests of the Mark and of the mountains of Golgar. I think that is really one of your strengths. And the scouts are. I think I am one of the characters who likes. We talk always about readers who prefer teams or characters, and I think I'm one of the things that I love is character interactions, the chemistry between the characters, and right away the scouts were. I really liked how I understood, not to spoil too much for book 3 in this section, but I understood why the Golgar Scout had some affinity for Dayraven.
Yeah, I hope that came through, and maybe that comes as you're absolutely right about the Nepal connection there, and the mountains of Golgar. The Mark, I would say, is very closely based on Vermont, which is my home state in terms of the landscape. But yeah, and I think there might even be in the way in which the scouts interact, the way they joke with each other. There might be some Glenn Cook influence there, or even Stephen Erickson Malazan influence in terms of their dialogue and humor and that sort of thing that's going on in there. So yeah, very cool. All right. Well, Rohana needs to leave very soon, so I'm going to let you, Rohana, ask your return to Adan question, and then Marcus and MacScarfield and I will just continue the conversation for as long as we like.
Cool. Okay. So my observation for return, this is the part of the story that I think you really let it go with the Eastern mysticism influences. Like Raven sitting under the tree, becoming the raven when he's climbing the mountain to get to the dragon.
That's
like,
actually book 2, but that continues in the 3rd book. That's okay.
Yes, yeah, sorry. I read these books a while ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically the 3rd book is where he achieves enlightenment, which is a kind of like scary experience because it basically like detaches you from your humanity, which he's already like fighting tooth and nail because he has this like super powerful elf being inside of him that just wants to kill everybody.
That's essentially true. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So he is basically this kind of like, his body is this meeting point for these like 2 immense powers that both need to exist in the universe. They both have to exist, but in balance with each other. And so he is fighting this battle for balance within himself while fighting this battle for balance in the world outside. Yeah, but like essentially, as I said before, even though these horrible and terrible facts about the universe are all true, even though all this evil exists, what saves everything is love in the very end. And like, of course, like Dayraven has to sacrifice himself. Like, of course, there's no way. You really had us convinced before that ending. But I mean, I know we've talked about the ending before. I think that is the best possible ending. And I mean, I was completely expecting that Dayraven wouldn't make it out alive, but you see that his love for, I mean, his friends and his family, for Sequara, and for, you know, humanity itself, his love continues. And that is really the most powerful weapon that even like trumps over the elf in a way. So I think that's really beautiful. Like when you really boil down all the elements of your story, you have this like very, very powerful meaning behind all of it. So I think it is beautifully done. And those are all of my observations for the Edan series.
Awesome. I'll let you go very soon, but I do want to tell you that you can partly blame, at least partly, Simon Lipscar for the ending. Because Simon Lipscar was my agent who helped me improve these books a lot. And when I was thinking to go the traditional publishing route, wonderful person. And but one of the conversations that we had was, in order for an ending to feel compelling, you can't have just triumph. You can't have just victory. There needs to be some loss mixed in there. And think of all the, you know, end of Lord of the Rings. Yes, good wins, but the elves have to leave Middle Earth, you know. Think of all the great series that you've ever read and the ones that moved you the most. And there's loss there at the end. And that's life. You don't have triumph without loss. You don't have love without grief. That's just the intertwined nature of our existence. And I think that growing up means finding a way to accept that and embrace it even. So thank you. I'm glad that the ending actually worked for you, my dear. And I know you have to leave, so I will let you go. And thank you so much for participating. And
thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to meet you, Marcus and MacScarfield. And yeah, I'm really glad that I got to come on here and talk about these books. They're a really special project. I literally grew up watching
Yeah.
my father write these books. They're like his third child. Honestly, they are.
Fourth child, because we had Belladonna.
Oh, right. Fourth child.
Yeah.
May her soul rest in peace forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Belladonna,
our dog who died last year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
All right, my dear. Be safe. I love you.
Okay. Bye, Dad. I love you.
It was great meeting you.
Bye. Take care.
Nice meeting you.
All right. So, Marcus, what would you like to say or observe or ask about the Return to Adan?
So the biggest thing that spoke, well, there's lots of things that spoke to me through this book. I think the biggest thing, though, is the effect that Dayraven has on the individuals he meets.
Uh-huh.
So overall, so for background, I'm Roman Catholic, so we have this
Yep.
Saint culture, I would say,
Mhm.
or tradition. So he has an effect on the individuals he meets, which I would apply to or compare to our Saint Francis of Assisi.
Oh, yes. Yes. I like that.
So-
I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yep. Whenever I read that first encounter, it was either the first or second encounter where the individual just gives up everything and
That's the prologue. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, that right there is a St. Francis story. So I enjoyed that a lot. And then you see it kind of evolve throughout the entire book up until the point to where with Jorman, he kind of changed Jorman's mind into becoming his own type of sacrifice.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it steadily evolves throughout the book. And I thought you did that very well. And that's sort of the element that kind of kept me reading that book. It was just seeing how his interactions with people would change individuals, through love and journey.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I put that prologue there. And then I didn't let you see Dayraven again for like a third of the book.
Yeah.
Which was very, of course, deliberate. And I wanted to build up the tension and give you a sense of what was happening with him through what he was doing to other people. So that was very important. And not all of it intentionally either, right? There's this battle going on within him, this debate between himself and his love for humanity and the elf, which is essentially is an alien, has an alien perspective, alien to humans, and is simply an ethereal, timeless being that, from its perspective, here, look, there are all these creatures here that are suffering. They're causing a lot of suffering. Let's get rid of the suffering, so there's a certain logic to that.
Well, and it's common too on a lesser extent naturally, but like for everyone, all three of us, everyone on earth has this internal struggle of doing good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to struggle with that in order to make your journey. Well, it's part of your journey, but
Yep.
To get to that enlightenment or the end result of whatever you believe.
Right.
Naturally overcoming that elf shard is your own personal battle that you have to overcome.
That's so well said. Yeah, so well said. So yeah, I am definitely trying to give that sense throughout Return to Adan of the effect that Dayraven has on those around him and his struggle to use that effect for good. Because when he finally emerges in the story, and we're seeing what he's done to all the people he's encountered through the eyes of the others who are trying to chase him down, Galdor and Orvandil and Gnorn and Aban. Also, Sequara sees him in a vision, in a true dream at one point. But finally we see him emerge, and there he is, and he finds a purpose for himself in the midst of this struggle, which is, I can make things better here. This is a place where people are suffering terribly. This is a place that is war-torn, is riddled by this plague that is spreading. And I think I found my purpose, because he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know why he's there. All he's heard is, "Oh, you must be the prophet of Adan." He's like, okay. So he finds a purpose for himself, which is, how can I spread love? How can I help these people? And he goes about it by not just helping the people who are the victims, but also by including the Torlanders, the people who have been conducting the oppression. And you have soldiers like Edge, who he's the guy who finds Saren and rescues her and initially hides her existence from King Erkenwald and the others because he knows what they would do to her. So yes, MacScarfield.
Yeah, as you said, I come from a Protestant tradition. I actually just came from a prayer house meeting just from before this. So you know, when I was reading this, of course, I was seeing, you know, Jesus and the fishermen disciples. You know, there are some very clear parallels, and I would say your parallel of the brothers. Of course, there are connections to Cain and Abel, the dreams of Joseph and dreams of Joseph and Daniel. So. Yeah, and the meeting with, as you said, the taller the soldier and the old man just hugging each other is one of your most beautiful scenes I think you have written. So
thank you. And it was a late scene too. It was one of my final revisions. Was that scene actually? I'm glad it worked for you. Yeah.
And Edge is a character, you know, sort of Saint Peter, sort of Cornelius the centurion, you know, people who you know was oppressing the Jews, and you know still was considered a righteous man for the early Christians. So, and of course, the meeting of Dayraven and Saren in the dungeons of
yes.
Yeah, again, there are you could sort of think about Jesus and the Marys coming to Jesus and. Aslan and the Pevensey sisters, you know, there are I really love those parallels there, or Ged and Tenar actually also to a certain extent.
That's right. Ged and Tenar as well. Yes, yeah, well said. Yeah, no, for me, Saren kind of stole my heart while I was writing this, and I had no idea she was going to end up being so central to this story. And I'm so glad she turned up in book 3. And the interactions between her and Dayraven, and also even the scene that I asked my artist and my cover designer to produce for the cover, which is the scene where Saren is singing in front of Aban and Galdor and Orvandil and Norn, and all of her suffering comes out in that song, in that singing. And they feel it, particularly Aban, who is a musician and knows what music is for, knows that music is all of our experiences, our grief and our love wrapped up into a moment. And so, yeah, I'm trying to express that through this character, who I think she did her job very well. She helped me out a lot in writing this story. So, but yeah, in that moment when she, and I tried to set this up early with the whole swimming contest when we first meet her, and swimming out to Crag Isle, and there's that little way inside the cave, which turns out to be instrumental later on when she goes in to try to find Dayraven. And of course, as she says, there was nothing like Crag Isle, because it was a much more harrowing experience. But her bravery, her courage, to me, is something special in this book. So yeah, she's a real example of courage, I would say. Yeah. So other things about I know MacScarfield, you had more stuff, and you as well. If you come up with anything for return, just kind of jump in anytime.
Yeah, of course.
MacScarfield, I know you had more than one thing you
want. Yeah. I mean, I have dozens, but one that I think we have to talk about perhaps is the return of Bagsack.
Bagsack.
Yes. And just as you first time when Bagsack was Bagsack, you this is gonna be fun, and I'm like, oh no, this is gonna go horrible for Bagsack. and I think you have to agree that there is a certain aspect of Gollum actually, or other or perhaps even Grendel in the this is other that he can't reduced to such a state that I don't know how to think about it. Actually, it's really heartbreaking to read his chapters when he has lost his powers, and you know, I can think about people who are suffering from substance abuse or other stuff, but still, this is dark. This is dark to read. Yeah.
I feel like the darkest parts of this book might be the bag sack chapters, maybe. And he ends up in a place where I feel awful for him. You know, I feel such pity and empathy for him in these moments. But then the interesting thing to me is he proves vital, because it's Bagsack who reveals that there is a way into Sigcel. There is a way into the dungeons. So Saren never would have been able to find Dayraven if it had not been for Bagsack. And I think that no matter how bad it gets, there is always something you have to contribute to the people around you. No matter how low you feel you are, you have value. You know, there is something that you only you can give to the people around you. And it turns out that way for Bagsack. And I you know, I think I allude to the fact that he's going to have a happy ending, sort of. He's not, what happened to him is not, they can't heal that, but he's going to have a job as a librarian in the monastery, and he's going to have a comfortable the rest of his existence. And I'm glad I was able to give him that, as well as a moment of purpose and a contribution in the story. So hopefully that all made sense. And there's even a moment when he gets to see Dayraven again and initially is terrified because he realizes, oh, I tried to kill you once. You know?
Yeah.
But there's a real forgiveness there, I think, in that moment. So there's the idea of redemption is something that I am trying to explore through Bagsack. Any other thoughts for either one of you two on any of the aspects of Return to Adan?
Marcus, you first.
I think one of the things I enjoyed most about the book overall is, since it was written over such a large period of time, you know, you can really see your writing grow. It started off amazing, but it only got better and better the whole way through.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that's, you know, from character detail to the actual developing of the individual factions or cultures, the religious elements, all of it grew the entire way through the story. So that was one of the best parts, I thought, you know, just about the journey overall.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you felt that way. And even the new characters in the third book, like Saren, we already talked about, but there were others like Elfwe, for example, the Earl from, well, he actually appeared a little bit in book 2, but we really see him as he journeys alongside Sequara. And I like him a lot. You know, he makes a very noble sacrifice there in the end, in that final battle, where they're trying to delay the horde of elf zombies that are descending on the mark. He buys some time, you know, for Dayraven to realize what he needs to do. And so sacrifice becomes a major theme, I think, there as well, with ultimately ending in Dayraven's sacrifice, which he knew from, in a way, you know, in that moment where he allows himself to go into the realm of origins like Ord did and realizes this is what I have to do now. We get a sort of a revisitation to the previous books where it's, oh, that was me. He sends, in a way, he's in this timeless place where he sees past, present, and future all at once and realizes that was me. I put myself on this journey. And knowing that, what it would mean, knowing the loss that it would mean for him, that was a choice that he made in that moment, you know. And so he sent the raven to himself when he was, you know, in the forest of the Mark, and he sent the raven to make sure he finished that journey when he was hanging from the cliff, you know, about to encounter the dragon Gorsarhad in book 2. And of course, he ended everything there by allowing himself to enter into the elf once again. And so, yeah, sacrifice becomes a huge part of it as well. Yeah. So what else have you got for me, MacScarfield?
Well, one thing I want to talk about is how you write your battle scenes. Could perhaps be very interesting because there is this triangulation effect in, especially in the two later books. You know, from the battle of the capital of Sildaharan. You know, you have this almost bird's eye view from the dragons. You have Sequoias. I mean, again, I'm trying to say you're a good writer, so I'm trying to say there's some heartbreaking scenes. You know, Sequoia and the Ilshara girl, you know, it's
Yes.
having her. It's again, it's such a heartbreaking scene on so many levels, and of course from Munsils attacking outside also. So you and in the third book you have the perspective in the battles of Sildrahan, you have the perspective from Munsils, but you have from Porkeven, can we say now? Porkeven and Golgar scouts again, which again I've loved seeing them back again, and I loved how you kind of feel I don't want either of these fellows to die, but you know some of them are not gonna make out of there.
Yeah.
So I am very excited. I think one of the things that I'm most excited when you told me that you are going to write a sequel is that I really want to see, if the one area I really want to see is how has Sildaran changed after this war, because this is one of the things that I was thinking, okay, are the Ilshara still ruling as a small elite, or are they all wiped out? How will the ideology of the prophets, which seems to be almost becoming a majority religion now, how is that going to change the whole cultural sphere of Sildaran? So I don't know if that is still going to be the subject of your sequel, but that is something I really, because again, I think that could be a very interesting topic to delve into.
Yes. Well, what I can say is that around 15 years or so have gone by, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, a person like Dayraven does not step into the world and not have an impact on it. So the way that religion is understood is going to change. He never thought of himself as being a prophet of anything. You know, he was just sort of put in that role at the Battle of Thulhan. Galdor essentially whispers in his ear, "You're the prophet now. You're the prophet of Adan." He's like, "I am? Oh, okay. All right. Well, like, what can I do with this?" You know. So yes, the way of Adan does change as a result of Dayraven, and it also spreads, ironically, because you know that was Bloodless' goal, right, from the beginning, was to spread this religion, and strangely enough, it does, but in a form that he never would have imagined, because you have this newer prophet who has delivered a slightly different, you know, wrinkle on this. Which is the nature of religion, after all. You know, you have powerful figures within religions, you have founder figures, but you also have people who, in succeeding generations, you know, right from the beginning with Christianity, you had Paul, for example, who had a big impact on the early church. And then you have later people like Augustine, you know, and other figures who changed the way, you know, things are perceived on some levels, and that's the nature of it. So yes, the way of Adan does change. You will get to see Azdralad rebuilt. You will get to see lots more of the Theoths in Grimrick. So that's for the Scandinavians out there. And you will get to see the Ilarchai, what has become of them. Because we do know at the end of the trilogy that Bolverk, who is the chieftain of the Raven Eyes, has escaped, at least. But that's a small fragment of the total folk of the tribes. So they are most certainly much diminished. But Bolverk, as you know, that's a name for Odin, one of the many names. And he's got the one eye as well. So there's some Odin references there. He's a pretty clever fellow. So yeah, you will get to some answers, I think, in While Darkness Gathers, which is the sequel. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you too. Well, I want to give you a chance for any final questions or observations before I let you two go.
If I can add two, but
Yes.
it goes
Oh,
to the
absolutely.
one is the kings of Naitan and Erkenwald here in the last book. To me,
Yes.
they felt very much as possibly different aspects of Denethor II, the steward.
Oh, Denethor from Lord of the Rings.
Yes, because in Naitaran, you had your talk with Tom Shippey, and he told you about how in Beowulf and in this, when kings die, there are in the Norse tradition there are very definitely sacrifices, even human sacrifices.
Yep.
And while in Beowulf this is kind of toned down, and I was and how in the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien kind of hints to that with Denethor. He's gonna burn like the heathen kings of old.
Yes.
And Naitaran, he is sacrificed on the fire, just like against his will.
Not willingly. Yeah.
But he has a steel will. He's, even though he has lost all his powers and he is very stoic to the end on that topic, even though he is horrific. While Erkenwald, on the other hand, is perhaps the more desperate. He is the one who has completely lost his marbles, to use a academic term, and he is the one who tries to redeem himself not by lighting himself on fire, but dying glorious in battle, and with not the best consequences for himself.
Yeah.
So I was interested in seeing that as different aspects of Denethor and using that. So
Yeah.
and the last thing that I wanted to talk about is because it's one of the things that actually from the very first book that I think was very interesting. Again, I love how you create your myths and your stories. And one of the stories that really I found interesting is the story of Vilfar and Elfskin. Would that be
Alfshin. Yes.
Elfskin?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would like to just hear your thoughts about the process of creating that
Sure.
story, actually.
Okay.
Because is
Very
that
good.
an early or late edition, for example?
Yeah, it's pretty early actually. But to go back to just briefly to Naitaran, I think you're absolutely right that he is a Denethor-like figure. Although Denethor, of course, was not a king, technically speaking.
No, but
Yeah. But yes, you're absolutely right. That's a pretty brilliant connection. On some level, I'm sure Denethor was in my mind when I was developing Naitaran. Erkenwald, he ends up that way because Dayraven is trying to fix things. And Dayraven is human. He makes mistakes. And one of them might be the idea that you can force someone to be empathetic. But he pours all those experiences into Erkenwald's mind and makes him experience what he did to all those people. And, there's a little piece of me that does wish that we could do that to bullies, that we could make them experience the pain that they are giving other people. And I know that a lot of times when bullies are acting that way, they're acting out of their own pain as well. But yes, that ultimately is a failure in that Erkenwald, as you say, loses his marbles and he doesn't end up being as empathetic as Dayraven might have wanted. In other words, it's still all about him, and he wants to be the hero who saves the day at the end, and he does so in a way that is not very effective in his night dress, going out to confront the Ilarkai horde that is taking over Torhelm and getting trampled by his own people. So I tried to set up a very, I don't know if you noticed, I don't think anyone has actually noticed this yet, but there's a chapter of an Erkenwald chapter, his first POV chapter in The Way of Adan, where I almost word for word repeat that chapter, but I changed certain words in the third book and Return to Adan. And both scenes, he's standing on the balcony, he's looking out over Torhelm, and in the Way of Adan, of course, it's with this smug kind of, yes, I am the dude, I rule over all this is for me. And then I just take that almost word for word and I tweak it in the Return to Adan, where this is after he's had all these voices essentially put in his head. And it's a very different tone. But you can see almost word for word at times with certain keywords that are changed. and he has a very tragic end. And I must say, I have to work hard at feeling sympathy for him, but but I do feel a bit for him there in the end. So, but your other question was about
The story of Wilfar and
Wilfar
Elfskin
and
from the
Elfshin.
first, because
Yes.
again, I thought that was a story that I don't think you've read the Kalevala, but
Oh, I've
again,
read the Kalevala many times. Yeah.
oh, you have read it, yeah, because that was one of the things, this again, there are a lot of other stuff, but it was the tragedy of Kalevala, the color, for emphasize the tale of Kullervo,
Yes.
is very much on my mind. How you just, this is just a downer story, but
Yeah.
on the other hand, it is very this connection that even the Talllanders and it has to the Wildlanders, but still separate. There is an interesting connection there.
Yes. So that is a story, and of course, the Kullervo from the Kalevala is the inspiration for Tolkien's Turin, as you know. But I have this story that I essentially made up. The story of Elfshin, who was abducted by this Ilarkai tribe and was taken from her betrothed Wilfar. And it's a variant on the theme of exile that I'm exploring very much in from the first book, and how identity is wrapped up in your community. And when that's taken from you, or you are taken from it, the impact that it has on you as a person in terms of your own identity. But I made up that story, but I hope it is a story that would have been told, the type of story that would have been told by, let's say, an Old English bard or an Old Norse skald. The type of story that it has inherent tragedy, but also conflict, because here you have Elfshin, who was taken from her home in Elend, and all that she knew, she was forced into a new identity. Now she becomes the wife of this tribal leader off in the Wildlands, and she establishes a life there. But along comes Wilfar years and years later. He's finally tracked her down, and that ends tragically. But when she realizes who he is, her entire life floods back into her. And where is her loyalty in that moment? This man who just killed her son, that she named after him, right? She ends up at the funeral of her son while his body is burning on the pyre, taking his sword, burning her hand in the process, and plunging that sword into the chest of her husband. Now, there may have been moments during her life with this man where she convinced herself, yes, okay, this is my life now. I belong here. I'm one of these people now. But when Wilfar came back, her whole identity flooded back into her. And all that had been torn from her returned to her. And that was, as much as anything, the reason why she plunged that blade into the chest of the man who caused all the break in the first place. So that to me, they love these poignant moments of conflict, and here are these two parts of her in this tug of war, and which side is going to win and how, and there is no happy ending here. It is going to be tragic. You just don't know how,
Yeah, as I said, it reminded me of Kullervo, how it is this warrior that it just completely goes down in the rain. But there is also an aspect of the Finnsburg fragments. Yeah, of course, of Hildeburg,
conflict.
Hildeburg, who is the only one alive, and yet her and Hengist, so.
Yeah.
And of course, the 12 guys that Wilfar takes, it kind of becomes a version of the 12 warriors that Beowulf has with him fighting the dragon, and who abandons him, so.
Yep. So yeah, lots of tragedy inherent in that. And fortunately, I hope there are moments of beauty and wonder and that in the series as a whole. But yeah, plenty of tragedy to contemplate in there as well. So yeah. Well, I do want to thank you too, very much. This has been a joy for me. I love getting to talk to readers, and I am very grateful to the two of you for all the feedback all the comments. It's just wonderful for a writer to have that. Really is the ultimate thing, really. So I appreciate you both. And of course, my daughter, Rohana, who had to leave earlier. But thank you really from the bottom of my heart for reading this trilogy and for being willing to sit with me and discuss it. You guys are the best. So, and also thank you to everybody who's been watching this. I appreciate you all. And there will be, I think, a couple more at least of these if people want to watch this sort of thing. I love getting to talk to people. And I think long term, hopefully, maybe there will be lots of people who want to watch this as maybe, I hope anyway, as more people read the trilogy. But thank you guys, and thank you everybody out there, and until next time.